Greetings and welcome to Yellowstone Ghost Stories, episode 21. The lake never, never gives up its dead. Yellowstone Lake is not only the park's largest lake, but one of the world's largest freshwater lakes as well. Geological evidence tells us that this mysterious lake may have a different time at different times drained into the Pacific Ocean, the Arctic Ocean, and the Atlantic Ocean. The lake is 20 miles long, 14 miles wide, and has 110 miles of shoreline. The deepest point is 320 feet deep in the West Thumb area, and the overall depth is about 139 feet. Because of its altitude of 7,333 feet, and the fact that it's fed by melting ice and snow, the lake stays an average of 41 degrees when it's not frozen. The lake's low temperature makes it an extremely dangerous environment, especially when prevailing southwesterly winds produce waves 5 to 6 feet high. Many a soul has been lost in the lake. Most people who have drowned in Yellowstone National Park have done so in Yellowstone Lake. There have been approximately 40 drownings, mostly due to boating accidents. Once a boat swamps or overturns, there is little chance of survival. Victims have only about 20 minutes before hypothermia begins to set in. Death from the cold temperature is almost certain. The first documented deaths were in 1894 when 3 men took a small rowboat on the lake on July 4th. The men headed for Stevenson Island with a supply of beer and plans to celebrate. When they didn't return that evening, a search began, but it was in vain. No one was found, just a little boat floating upside down near the shore of the island. The 3 bodies were never found. Another drowning accident that took place prior to 1930 was just as mysterious, if not more so. In fact, the story ended up being rather bizarre and is most likely the very basis for the legend that Yellowstone Lake never gives up its dead. The evening of August 26, 1906 started out like any other evening. A party of 6 young men and women set out in a small rowboat at the West Thumb. Their destination? Nowhere in particular. They were just out to have an enjoyable time. Not more than 100 yards from the shore, the small boat started to take on water. The weight of the 6 passengers was just too much for the rowboat, and it started sinking. Panic struck, and the passengers frantically started bailing, but the rowboat continued to fill. Soon it capsized and threw everyone into the icy water. The 2 young women must have had the hardest time, as the bulkiest of their dresses and petticoats would have made it almost impossible to stay afloat. Again, all odds, and with all of their might, one of the ladies swam ashore. One of the men, A.D. Taylor, with the aid of another male passenger, whose name is not known, helped the second young lady. By this time, the sun was down, and the icy lake was becoming colder by the minute. It was not clear how, when, or in what condition the survivors were found, but only 4 made it through the disaster. W.B. Taylor, a brother of A.D. Taylor, and Harry Allen, an Army private stationed at Fort Yellowstone and assigned to the West Thumb Soldier Station. Both lost their lives in the cold darkness of the lake that night. It's not certain if they died from hypothermia or drowning, but like those before them, their bodies were never found. Here is where the legend comes in. The Taylor brothers were from Bozeman, Montana. About 4 months after the accident, Major Pitcher, the acting superintendent of Yellowstone National Park, received this somewhat odd letter from their father. Bozeman, Montana, December 13th, 1906. Major Pitcher, Gardner, Wyo. Dear Sir, I write to you to know if you have learned anything from the two men drowned in Yellowstone Lake the 26th of August, 1906. One of them was my son, W.B. Taylor. The other one of the soldier of the thumb, Allen by name. The reason why I ask is my son was a member of WOW and was insured. And that long wishes us to write to you to see if you have learned anything of them or not, so you will please let me hear from you in regard to this matter. I have been told by many that the lake never gives up its dead. If you know this to be the case, will you please make a statement to this effect at your earliest convenience and oblige G.P. Taylor. Whatever were Major Pitcher's beliefs concerning Yellowstone Lake, he was not at liberty to share it with Mr. Taylor. It was true that a substantial number of bodies drowned in the lake were never found. Major Pitcher did, however, feel that the family of W.B. Taylor needed reassurance of some kind. Why he chose to write to Mrs. Taylor instead of Mr. Taylor is again a mystery, but the letter was as follows. December 17th, Mrs. G.P. Taylor, Bozeman, Montana. Dear Madam, replying to your letter of December 13th, I regret to inform you that the bodies of the two men who were drowned in Yellowstone Lake have not been recovered. Should the body of your son ever be recovered, you will be promptly notified, and I am not able to state as to whether or not the statement that the lake never gives up his dead is true. Yours respectfully, John Pitcher, Major, 6th Cavalry, Acting Superintendent. Strangely enough, the park rangers who work on the lake have reported seeing that what they thought were bodies floating on the surface were swept onto the shores. These bodies were said to be dressed in clothing of a century past. In fact, a year after the Taylor incident, an employee of the lake's boat company discovered a human skull washed up on the west shore of Stevenson Island. Thinking that it might belong to W.B. Taylor, the family was notified as promised. Unfortunately, the little flesh remaining on the jaws and the skull, the left ear, and the teeth were not enough to make a positive identification. Nevertheless, it was decided that it probably belonged to either Taylor or Allen. Later, other bones believed to be Allen's were also found buried near the lake shore. Yellowstone Lake isn't the first lake to keep its dead. Lake Erie and several lochs in Europe are said to hold the same power. But why? There are several theories, both scientific and paranormal. Scientifically speaking, the lake is so cold that the bodies almost freeze, becoming heavy and sink to the bottom. Paranormally, most water deaths, because of the tragic nature of the accidents, make it difficult and even impossible sometimes for the spirit to move on. In this sense, even if the body is eventually found, the spirit remains trapped in the cold lake and does not move into the next world. There is an old legend attached to the rime of the Ancient Mariner, which says that those who die at sea gather together to await Judgment Day. Perhaps the whispers of Yellowstone Lake are really the voices of the drowned, beseeching the coming of their Judgment Day. Hopefully you enjoyed that story, the closing story of our Yellowstone Ghost Stories series. Look forward to seeing you one more time to close out this book and give a recap and give you just a very slight introduction into our next series starting in 2022. Okay, so until the next and last episode of this series, we will see you again then. Take care. Hopefully you've enjoyed this series, and don't forget, one more recap to finish off this Yellowstone Ghost Stories series, and then a brief intro onto the next round of Ghost Stories. We'll see you in the next episode, in the last episode of this series. Bye for now.